Welcome to Shatter.
Help me reach 5,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. She texted me that night, short and sharp, the way she'd been speaking lately. I don't need to tell you where I am. I remember staring at the message while standing in the kitchen, the smell of her reheated Dunkin' still hanging in the air, even though she hadn't touched the cup. I typed a single word back. Sure. No questions, no follow-up. Just that. And something inside me went quiet, the kind of quiet that isn't anger but distance forming in real time. 5 minutes later, I was in my Chevy Silverado, driving with a certainty I still can't fully explain. It wasn't gut instinct. It was something colder, a pattern I'd felt building for weeks. The late Walmart runs, the nights she claimed she was decompressing in the living room watching Netflix, but her phone kept lighting up. And the way she smiled at our neighbor Mark whenever he stopped by for a quick check on the mower. She thought those moments were invisible. They weren't. I wasn't heading anywhere at first. I was just driving, letting the roads tell me what I already knew. Then my phone buzzed with a message from a number I didn't recognize. It was his wife, Laura. We'd barely spoken beyond backyard greetings, but she wrote, "Is your truck out? Because Mark isn't home, and I think I know where he is." Another message followed. A screenshot of a motel reservation charge she'd seen on their shared bank account. Room 202. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. 10 minutes later, we were standing together outside the door of that motel room, her breathing uneven, mine steady to the point of feeling unreal. She raised her hand to knock, then stopped, waiting. She wanted me to say something, to prepare her, or myself, or the moment. I said nothing. My silence was the only stability in the hallway. When her knuckles finally hit the door, it wasn't rage that moved through me. It was recognition. Everything I had tried to ignore was suddenly aligning with a precision so sharp it felt surgical. I wasn't there to confront anyone. I was there to confirm what I already understood. She had stepped outside our life, and she thought I was still standing in place. She had no idea I'd already started walking away. The door to room 202 never actually opened. That was the part that surprised me. Laura knocked once, twice, and then she stopped, listening. There was movement inside, the kind people make when they're scrambling to fix something that's already broken. But no one came to face us. No explanations, no staged confusion. Just a silence thick enough to confirm everything. Laura whispered that she didn't need to see them. She already knew. Her voice cracked on the last word, but she kept her posture straight, like she'd been rehearsing detachment long before tonight. I didn't answer her. I didn't need to. I was focused on something else entirely, the sudden understanding that this wasn't a moment of confrontation. This was the first real distance I'd felt from my own wife. We walked back to the parking lot, not speaking. She went to her sedan. I went to the truck. She called out that she'd send me the motel charge details, just in case I needed them. I nodded once and drove off without waiting for her to start her engine. My hands relaxed on the wheel the farther I got from that motel, as if my body already recognized a truth my mind hadn't caught up with yet. I didn't go home. Instead, I drove the long way around town and stopped outside the Best Buy where my wife had claimed she'd been picking up a charger the week before. That was the night she'd come home late, smelling like someone else's cologne, saying she'd lost track of time. I remembered standing in our hallway, watching her slip past me, watching her avoid my eyes. Tonight, sitting in my truck facing that quiet storefront, I finally let myself admit what I'd pushed aside then. There isn't one moment when trust breaks. It's a slow, steady unraveling that you pretend not to feel. And yet here I was, tracing back every thread I'd dismissed. My phone buzzed again, this time from a Craigslist alert I didn't remember setting. A used mechanic's toolbox, posted an hour ago, the seller's location just 2 streets away from our house. The timing wasn't subtle, and the name on the listing wasn't either. I realized then that this wasn't the beginning of the story. This was the confirmation that it had been unfolding behind my back for far longer than I allowed myself to see. I drove home just before midnight, the streets empty enough that the sound of the truck settling in the driveway felt louder than usual. The house was dark except for the faint glow of Netflix playing in the living room. She always used it as a shield, letting the noise drown out any conversation she didn't want to have. I stepped inside quietly, not sneaking, just observing the life I'd been moving through on autopilot. She was on the couch, blanket over her legs, pretending to be half asleep. She didn't ask where I'd been. She didn't look at me long enough to notice anything different in my face. That was the part that struck me deeper than the motel hallway ever could. She mumbled something about a long day, her voice distant, rehearsed. I watched her reach for her phone and flip it face down on the cushion. That small gesture told me more than any confession ever would. Silent patterns don't lie. I told her I had paperwork in the garage, which wasn't a lie, just not the full truth. I sat in the workshop, letting the quiet stretch until the weight of the night finally settled into clarity. I opened the Craigslist listing again. The seller's name was Mark, same as our neighbor, and the pickup location was his garage. The timestamp matched the exact window when she said she'd been running to Walmart for just a couple things. I remembered watching her come in that night with no bags and a fresh wave of perfume that wasn't hers. I'd brushed it off then. I wasn't brushing off anything now. I didn't message the seller. I didn't drive over. I did something simpler. I walked back inside, asked her if she needed anything from the store tomorrow since I'd be leaving before sunrise. She shook her head without looking away from the screen. She didn't notice that I was studying her carefully for the first time in weeks. She went upstairs early, leaving her phone on the armrest. Not carelessly, comfortably. As if she believed the version of me who never checked, never questioned, never pulled back. She didn't realize that version was already fading. I picked up the phone, not to open it, but to look at the reflection on the black screen. My face looked different. Calmer. Sharper. Like someone who had stopped fighting to be included in his own life. That was the moment I understood. The unraveling wasn't about her lies. It was about the space I was finally willing to create. I left before sunrise, letting the house stay asleep behind me. The air was cold enough that when I opened the truck door, the metal felt like a warning. I didn't take my usual route to the job site. Instead, I drove through the quiet streets of our neighborhood, passing the familiar houses that suddenly felt like pieces on a board I hadn't been paying attention to. When I slowed near Mark's place, his garage light was already on. A shadow moved inside. It wasn't him. It was her. She stepped out a moment later, locking the side door, her hair pulled back in a way she never wore it for me. She didn't see my truck. She didn't expect me to be anywhere except where I was supposed to be. She got into her car and drove off toward town, heading in the opposite direction of her office. I didn't follow her. I didn't need to. I understood enough to stop pretending I didn't. Instead, I kept driving, letting the distance between us grow without touching the gas pedal any harder. Work that day felt different. The usual rhythm of cutting boards, measuring frames, giving instructions, it all happened through a kind of internal silence I'd never experienced before. No anger, no rush, just clarity. At lunch, I sat in the truck and scrolled through old messages of hers, not reading them, just noticing the gaps. The unexplained pauses, the nights she claimed she was staying late, the mornings when her Dunkin' cup hit the counter long before she came in through the door. The patterns were consistent. I had simply chosen not to see them. When I got home that evening, she was already there, acting casual, talking about some harmless story from work. Her voice floated around the kitchen, filling space without landing anywhere near me. She mentioned needing to swing by Walmart later, saying it like a habit she assumed I'd never question. I nodded once, watching the way she avoided my eyes. I didn't ask where she'd really been. I didn't confront her about the garage door at dawn. Instead, I walked past her, took a long shower, and moved through the house with a calm she didn't recognize. She asked if something was wrong. I said I was just tired. It wasn't a lie. I was tired, just not in the way she thought. I was tired of being reachable. And for the first time, she felt the shift. The next morning, I didn't tell her I was heading out early. I just left, letting the door close behind me without the usual hesitation. The quiet felt intentional now, like a tool I was finally learning how to use. I drove past the edge of town, parking near an unfinished project site where no one would look for me. I shut off my phone and let the silence settle. It wasn't about disappearing. It was about stepping out of reach, even if only for a few hours, long enough for her to feel the absence instead of assuming my presence. When I turned the phone back on around noon, I had 3 missed calls and a text asking if I'd forgotten something at home. The tone was light, but underneath it I sensed a crack, small, but real. I didn't answer. I checked something else instead. The Craigslist listing from the night at the motel had been deleted, which told me more than if it had stayed up. People don't erase what they aren't afraid someone might see. I used the rest of the afternoon to go through the work accounts and set up boundaries she didn't know existed, separate passwords, new schedules, rerouted deliveries. Small shifts that changed nothing on the surface but rewired the foundation beneath it. When I finally drove back into the neighborhood, she wasn't home. Her car was gone, and the garage door at Mark's place was open again. I didn't slow down this time. I just parked in our driveway, walked inside, and waited. She came in an hour later carrying a small Walmart bag with a single bottle of shampoo inside, the receipt barely hanging from the plastic. She held it in a way that almost begged me to notice it, to accept the alibi she was handing over. I nodded once, giving her nothing more. She tried to tell me she'd run into someone from work, her voice a little too quick, a little too careful. I listened the way someone listens to rain hitting a window, not ignoring it, just recognizing it as background noise. That night, she kept glancing at me while Netflix played, pretending to follow the show while her eyes kept searching my face. She sensed something shifting, but she couldn't name it yet. She didn't understand that I wasn't reacting. I was creating distance, and the space between us was finally starting to feel real. The shift became noticeable before the sun came up the next day. She woke before her alarm, something she never did, and moved around the bedroom quietly, watching me from the corner of her eye like she was trying to catch a signal I wasn't giving anymore. I sat on the edge of the bed, tying my boots, letting the silence stretch just long enough for her to feel its weight. She asked if everything was okay. I said I had an early start. Nothing more. At work, the noise of hammers and saws usually grounded me, but that morning I felt strangely detached from it all, like I was watching my own life from a distance. During lunch I sat in the truck again, scrolling through old project photos, anything but messages. I didn't check for hers. I didn't wonder where she was. My attention was pointed somewhere else entirely, toward understanding what came next, not what she was doing in the moment. When I drove home that evening, there were two cars in front of our house, her sedan and, across the street, Laura's. She was standing by her door, arms crossed, watching my wife through the front window with an expression I'd seen only once, the night outside the motel. Something had changed in her since then, something sharper, less forgiving. When she caught sight of my truck, she didn't come over. She just nodded once, as if confirming I already knew whatever she'd learned. Inside, my wife was in the kitchen, moving fast, talking faster. She said she'd made dinner early and asked if I wanted to watch something on Netflix later. Her voice had a nervous brightness to it, the kind people use when they're trying to regain control of a room. I set my tools down gently, not answering right away. She tried again, asking about my day, her eyes searching my face for any softness. I told her it was fine and went upstairs to shower. No irritation, no accusation. Just a clean break in tone she couldn't bypass. When I came back down, she was standing in the middle of the living room, hands tied around her phone. She asked if I was mad at her, if she'd done something. I said no. But the truth hung in the air anyway. She was used to me being predictable, reachable, steady. Now she was realizing she wasn't the one creating the distance. I was. She started circling me after that, not physically, but in every small behavior she thought I wouldn't notice. She came home earlier than usual, cooked meals she hadn't made in years, kept her phone in plain sight on the counter like a staged confession. None of it matched the woman who, just days earlier, told me she didn't need to explain where she was. The shift wasn't subtle. It was fear trying to dress itself as effort. I stayed quiet through all of it. Silence wasn't a strategy. It was the only honest reaction left. When she asked if I wanted something from Walmart, I told her I was set. When she brought home Duncan, placing the cup on the table like a peace offering, I thanked her without lifting my eyes from the paperwork. Every polite response revealed another inch of distance she couldn't close. 2 nights later, I walked into the living room and found her sitting on the couch, Netflix paused, the room too still for her to pretend she was watching anything. She asked if we could talk. I told her I had things to finish in the garage. Her shoulders dropped, not dramatically, just enough to show she was losing the ground she'd always counted on. She tried to follow me, asking what was going on, reaching for explanations she wasn't entitled to anymore. I told her I needed space. Nothing more. In the garage, I sifted through old notes, invoices, project plans, not because I needed to organize anything, but because the steady rhythm of work let me think clearly. I realized how long I'd lived on autopilot, assuming loyalty because I'd shown it, assuming commitment because I'd embodied it. I hadn't considered that someone could enjoy the comfort I built while stepping outside of it at the same time. She came to the doorway but didn't cross the threshold. She stood there, small in the dim light, asking if she'd done something wrong. I said I was tired. It was the truth. Her silence after that wasn't confusion, it was recognition. She felt the shift in power for the first time, the kind that doesn't need raised voices or accusations. Later that night, I heard her moving around upstairs long after I went to bed. Cabinet doors opening, drawers closing, a quiet panic moving through the house. She wasn't searching for proof of anything. She was searching for me, and for the first time, she realized she no longer knew where to find me. She waited for me in the kitchen the next morning, makeup done too early, hair fixed in a way that told me she hadn't slept. She asked if I could sit for a minute. I poured myself water and stayed standing. She tried again, her voice quieter, asking why I was pulling away. I told her I had work. Nothing more. The silence that followed wasn't cold. It was final in a way she couldn't negotiate with. When I stepped outside, Laura was across the street, closing her mailbox. She didn't wave, didn't approach, just watched my wife through our front window with a kind of restrained judgment that carried its own weight. My wife saw her too and immediately stepped back from the glass. That small retreat told me everything about where we were now. Whatever she feared losing wasn't me. It was her image, the one she'd built so carefully in this neighborhood. Work gave me distance again, enough to think clearly. I didn't check my phone all morning, not even during lunch. When I finally unlocked it in the afternoon, there were messages from her, short ones, cautious ones. She said she'd made dinner. She asked if I wanted to watch Netflix later. She asked if we were okay. The tone shifted from confidence to concern to something closer to anxiety. I didn't reply. When I came home that evening, the house smelled like she'd cooked for hours, but the table was untouched. She stood when I walked in, almost startled, like she'd prepared a speech she couldn't start. She said she felt like I was hiding something. I told her I wasn't hiding anything. I was simply paying attention. My voice was steady, quiet, unchanged. She didn't know how to step into a silence that wasn't forgiving. She followed me from room to room, asking questions she didn't know how to shape. She wanted a confrontation, something loud, something emotional, something she could argue with. But I wasn't giving her the version of me she was used to. No accusations, no demands, just space she couldn't enter. Later that night, she sat on the edge of the bed, hands shaking slightly as she said she felt like she was losing me. I didn't reassure her. I didn't correct her. I simply told her I needed clarity. The truth was simpler. She wasn't losing me. I was stepping somewhere she could no longer reach. The collapse didn't happen in one moment. It happened in small, sharp drops she couldn't control. The first came early in the morning when she stepped outside and saw Laura speaking quietly with another neighbor. They both stopped when my wife appeared, the way people do when they've connected the dots on something that was never meant to be public. My wife tried to act normal, waving, smiling, pretending the world looked the same as it had a month ago. It didn't. You could feel the shift in the air, social gravity tilting away from her, and she couldn't slow it down. She came back inside too quickly, locking the door behind her like she needed a barrier. I was drinking water at the counter, calm, steady, watching her without reaction. She asked if I'd heard anything. I said no. She wanted me to ask what was wrong. She wanted me to chase the conversation the way I always had. I didn't move toward her. The silence made her unravel faster than any accusation ever could. The second drop came later that afternoon. I was in the garage sorting through materials when she appeared in the doorway, eyes red like she'd been crying in the bathroom. She said she felt like people were looking at her differently. She said Laura had changed, suddenly distant. I told her people eventually see what they weren't meant to see. She flinched, just slightly, like the truth had grazed her instead of hitting her. She didn't deny anything. She didn't confess either. She just stood there, realizing the walls she used to lean on weren't holding her up anymore. That night she tried to bridge the distance again, cooking dinner, setting the table, talking fast about work. But her voice kept breaking at the edges. She said she missed us. I let her words hang in the air without picking them up. I wasn't punishing her. I was simply no longer volunteering myself as an anchor. Later, I heard her on the couch, scrolling through old photos, breathing unevenly. Netflix played quietly, but she wasn't watching it. She was replaying a version of our life where she never imagined she could fall. And in that quiet, I realized something she was only beginning to understand. Her collapse wasn't happening because I walked away. It was happening because I stopped holding her up. She broke the next morning, not loudly, not dramatically, but in the quiet way people do when they finally run out of places to hide. I came downstairs and found her sitting at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cold cup of Dunkin' she hadn't touched. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, like the air around her had thinned. She asked if we could talk, and for the first time in weeks, her voice didn't carry any strategy. It was stripped down, raw, almost unfamiliar. I sat across from her, not leaning in, not pulling back, just present enough for her to understand the difference. She said she knew I'd pulled away. She said she felt it in every room, in every silence. She didn't make excuses. She didn't say names. She only said she'd made mistakes and didn't know how to fix them. Her eyes stayed on the table the whole time, like she wasn't sure she still had the right to look directly at me. I let her finish, letting the truth settle without interrupting it. When she finally lifted her head, waiting for some kind of verdict, I realized she wasn't afraid of losing the marriage. She was afraid of losing the version of me who had once made her feel safe. I told her the truth, that I hadn't disappeared. I'd just stepped out of the space where I wasn't respected. My voice didn't rise. My hands didn't shake. I wasn't angry. I was clear. She broke again at that, not from guilt, but from finally understanding the distance wasn't temporary. It was earned. She reached for my hand, but stopped halfway, unsure if she had permission. I didn't move toward her, but I didn't move away either. I told her that if we were going to rebuild anything, it wouldn't be on the old ground. It would be on something new, something cleaner, something that didn't need explanations at 2 in the morning or stories about late Walmart runs that didn't make sense. She nodded, crying quietly, the kind of tears that come from recognition rather than fear. I stood, letting the weight of the moment stretch, giving her enough silence to understand it wasn't a punishment. It was a boundary. When I walked toward the door to leave for work, she whispered that she didn't want to lose me. I stopped, hand on the frame, and told her the only thing that felt true. I wasn't gone. I just stopped showing up where I wasn't valued. Support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. I promise even more interesting stories.